All right, it's 5:15 PM, Tuesday, August 1st. This is a joint Finance and ED meeting. I'm going to call the Economic Development Committee meeting to order. There is a quorum present.
Okay, and noting a quorum present, I will also call the finance portion of this committee meeting to order. The first item on our agenda is a presentation on the current state of economic factors in development.
Yes, so I basically wanted to put together this presentation, just brief overview of what is going on in the development world. We have had some things happen that have been pretty unpredictable in the development world lately, so I just wanted to take the opportunity to dive into why those are. This was in part prompted by questions about the mall delay, and it kind of got me asking questions, and so I figured this would be beneficial for everyone to see what is going on with economic development right now as a whole. So I quickly found that the problems and factors in development were not unique to this area, this developer, or this project, which is maybe no surprise to any of you. So this is my attempt to explain what's going on and why things are taking longer, harder to pencil out, and more expensive. So I will give you a disclaimer that this is going to be a very dry presentation. This is a very word-heavy slide deck, so don't expect to be entertained. And I will plan to make this available after the meeting. And so I thought that the words would be clearest to kind of get this rolling. So I'm reporting on this, but there are questions that I may not have answers to, and I may know that something is happening, but not the total root of why. So if you have a question about that, I will do my best to do some research and find out what's going on. So Cody, can you go to the next slide, please? So the agenda of the main factors negatively impacting development today. We'll go over an overview looking at global, national, regional, and local perspectives. We'll look at why there are fewer and less bank loans going on, or that there are fewer and less bank loans. So lower number of total loans and amount of funds lent is less. The consistently rising interest rates, uncertainty for equity partners, increased and not slowing labor costs, increased material costs that are still fluctuating. We'll go over a recap of those factors and then look at an outlook for the future. So an overview of the state of economic development. So this is impacting all types of projects globally. The mid-2023 prediction was adjusted actually up to 2.3% growth, and we expect a 2.5% growth projected for 2024, but those are both still below the average of 3.1% growth, like I said, average annually. Nationally, Fannie Mae is down 36% on their multifamily volume for lending, and Freddie Mac is down 60%. There are elevated borrowing costs. For example, the SOFR, or the standard secured overnight financing rate, went from below 1%, 0.78%, to over 5% in just over a year. And permits nationally are also down 33% for multifamily, and starts are down 11% year over year. We are being affected regionally and a little less so locally. All Wausau permits are down 20% year over year. And then I have some other examples from around the area. There's an architect that I know who is working on a small house project in a community a little southeast of here. His example was an 800 square foot house, 1 bed, 1 bath. It was a carport, a crawl space, was penciling out between $215,000 and $220,000 for construction. There was another couple local examples of 2,000 square foot homes with 2-car attached garages building brand new, anywhere between $450,000 and $550,000. So it is hitting quite close to home. If you could go to the next one. Bank loans are part of that. So banks are funding less on fewer projects, as I mentioned before. There are out of balance sheets. So commercial real estate and office assets are declining. Debt capital has pulled back due to collateral value uncertainty. And there are more construction loans than expected still on the books. Banks largely expected those loans to be sold off, and they have not been for various reasons that are kind of encompassed in this presentation. Also, of course, rapidly rising interest rates exacerbated the asset liability mismatches on bank balance sheets. And bank failures like the Silicon Valley Bank and First Republic and Signature Bank resulted in clogged debt markets, making loans more conservative. So an example that I read about was you might now get a 55% loan to cost loan as opposed to a 65% loan to cost loan. So even good projects, this source noted, are taking longer to close. And I do have a source slide at the end. So if you're curious to look more up, you can. Could you go to the next slide? So I have two slides on interest rates. The first slide shows a year difference. So 30-year fixed rate went from 5.3% to 6.81% over a year. 15-year fixed rates went from 4.58 to 6.11%. If you could go to the next slide, which puts it more in historic context, you can see that while rates are low historically speaking compared to, say, the 1980s, if you look at the past dozen or so years, it would really be nearly impossible to predict this type of rate increase and this pace of the rate hike. Such a factor that one source said the motto for the industry may instead maybe changed from location, location, location to location, location, the Fed. I thought that was kind of an interesting insight to what we're dealing with right now. If you could go to the next slide. So another component, and I'm sorry this is so hard to read, are equity investors. So equity investors are entitled to share of the property in proportion to the investment and then share in the capital gains when the asset is sold or refinanced. Real estate used to be a relatively safe and high yield investment because high values and low interest rates made refinancing lucrative and yields high. Now that values are falling, capital costs more, and lenders are being more conservative, so proceeds on new loans do not result in the same net positive difference. So real estate equity is being passed over in favor of more attractive and conservative asset classes. So basically, people are investing in things other than real estate. Uncertainty scares away investors, and currently uncertainty lies in the valuation, the returns, interest rates, demographics, geopolitical conflicts, and all of these other economic dynamics that we're going over today. So the CBRE 2023 Investment Intentions Survey, I think kind of encompasses the sentiment succinctly and says that almost 60% of respondents expect to lower their commercial real estate investments this year. So the key takeaway really on the equity portion is that equity investors are looking for high returns with little uncertainty, and we are certainly not in that place right now. What we need are interest rates to level out and bank asset sheets to balance out. You can go to the next slide. Then, of course, we also have construction costs. So I mentioned the calls I received in the last week regarding these housing builds were pretty illuminating. One of them actually came as a gut check of like, does this sound right to you? And I had to that's prompted some more research into like, wow, is it really costing $550,000 to build a 2,000 square foot home right now? It is. So labor is still the most expensive factor in construction. There are fewer contractors overall, which means they can practically name their own prices. As you can see, it's been really slow to recover from COVID as well. Materials, while some prices are falling, others are still climbing. And with a slowdown in the economy, usually you would expect to see construction costs fall, but that's just not happening right now. Part of that is due to an infusion of federal money for the Infrastructure Act, Jobs Act, CHIPS Act, and other non-residential uses that are sustaining and in some cases increasing material costs. And you can see that more on the the next slide. Which shows this is a November 2022 price prediction, but it has largely held true, especially with MEP's mechanical, electrical, and plumbing prices that are still up. You can go to the next slide. So this is kind of getting pummeled from all angles. Our development projects are really having a hard time due to unrelenting rising interest rates, fewer, less, and more restrictive bank loans, fewer and more risk-averse equity investors, and still high construction costs are just dealing simultaneous blows to this development process and projects across the board right now. So it's not just here, not just us. It is a tough time to be in this industry overall. But you can go to the next slide. However, things will get better. So despite these challenges, the outlook for multifamily is promising and looks good. Gen Z is coming into their peak rental years, and home ownership is unfortunately still out of reach for many due to high interest rates. And the Fed is looking like it's going to kind of level out interest rates in early 2024. And accordingly, development momentum is expected to pick up again when interest rates and bank lending practices settle out. So locally, the demand for housing hasn't ebbed. We still have 525 housing units that we need by 2025. And then the next slide is all of the sources. So if you're interested, there is a variety of reading you can do, and I'm happy to provide any of that. I'm happy to make this available and then provide any additional resources as well. So just wanted everyone to know that we're in a tough time, but it will get better.
All right, does anyone in economic development have questions for Liz? The presentation? Alder Killian?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in terms of outlook, both in the near future and distant, could you give me kind of your rationale on, with so many factors that appear to be difficult to kind of predict and how the outcomes are going to unfold, kind of your rationale and strategy on the near-term property purchases with public money for additional developments when currently, and I don't think it's from global conflict, I think there were some things that went awry, when currently such a large percentage of the deals or developments we're currently addressing are having such substantial problems. So could you kind of lay out what your perspective is on not just what a successful strategy may be, but one with an acceptable risk when kind of at this casino table we're playing with the public's money?
Yeah, so I think acquisition strategy is the properties that we've purchased recently have been very strategic acquisitions in terms of we've been looking at them for several years, in some cases decades, and we finally had a chance to purchase them. So just because the next year or so looks a little unpredictable for development of those properties, especially because we have our attention turned to other kind of more front burner projects, I'll call them, doesn't mean that they've been, bad or untimely investments. I think that they are investments, and because we have the city's strategy is to control some of the key properties in the area that have access issues for especially natural resources and things that might be contaminated. They are certainly strategic properties that we would want to have control of and be able to develop in the very, very long-term future. What we do as a city is not necessarily for the 2, 3, 10, even 20-year outlook. It's for the generations to come. So I think that when we talk about acquisitions of properties, what we're looking at is really the long-term good of the city and for our citizens.
Thank you. I do have a follow-up question and comment on that. And I do understand, I suppose, kind of a long-term strategy, but I think especially in difficult times when people are having trouble just paying for necessities, that we should be looking at kind of a double-edged sword where there are long-term benefits, but we need to see some sort of timely ROI. And I think to tell the taxpayer right now, especially with all they're facing, someday you'll be dead, but maybe your great-grandchildren may benefit from this if we can work out all of these profound kinks we're facing. I think that alone probably is not sufficient. So I would like to see, and I think this has been asked for on multiple occasions over the years, kind of reasonable break-even and ROI equations and formulas so that when we are spending public money, particularly millions in public money, that the city is being more candid and clear with the public and the taxpayer. And then Lastly, I just say my understanding right now of the deals that are having problems, while there may have been some macro influence, it really wasn't, something like global conflict that caused like issues with the West Side Battery and the sound issue on federal requirements. I think those requirements had been there even before probably inflation and a novel virus. And I think what we're seeing tonight with problems with the mall deal, that too was not about macro factors. My understanding, and I'd like to ask the city attorney more questions when we get to that time, but it was essentially our partners did not make good on, or are very close to not making good on contractual obligations, and that some of the decisions were voluntarily made on their end without seeking any city input on them. So I'm not sure that interest rates or global conflict are to blame for that. I think we need to look at these things more realistically at a local level, and this is very enlightening, but I think much of it is irrelevant to what we'll talk about later tonight. Thank you.
Does anyone from finance have questions about the presentation that we've seen? If not, then we would place that presentation on file. And so that brings us to item number 2, discussion and possible action on approving an offer to purchase of MBX property at 901 and 1021 Cherry Street and related budget modification. And so both of these items are posted for closed session deliberation, but we may have information we can offer in open session prior to that. So we'll bring up Randy. Welcome.
Good evening, everybody. First, I'll start with the MBX Cherry Street. You'll remember back to there was a June 13th joint meeting between the Finance and Economic Development Committees. Based on that discussion, staff went forward worked with REI to have a Phase 1 environmental done for the property. REI completed that Phase 1 environmental, which showed environmental conditions on the property that we would expect really from any property along the river that has historical industrial use. As you can see in the report, there's been industry on that property dating back to the 1800s. From that report, REI recommended the additional soil and groundwater testing be completed on the site based on that historical use. Staff reviewed the results of that along with our environmental engineer. From there, we requested and received an estimate from REI to do some of the testing they talked about. We can talk about that a little bit more in closed session depending on what direction you wish to go. Also wanted to mention at the July 24th meeting of the Bike and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, purchase for the Cherry Street property was on their agenda. The committee voted unanimously to approve the purchase of the property, stating that they felt there was important connection in the River Edge Trail system, and it would also secure the easement needed for the MBX South property. They noted that the graphic packaging section of the trail could not get built without Cherry Street property due to the lack of safe access to Cherry Street. So like I said, once we get to the point, we look for a motion to go into closed session and continue negotiations.
Okay. Do we want to take 2 and 3, the open session materials together and then, okay?
Yep.
So do you want to proceed right on to item 3 is discussion and possible action approving an offer to purchase of property at 1514 North 2nd Street and related budget modification?
Absolutely. So city staff was contacted regarding the purchase of this property at 1514 North 2nd Street. The property is adjacent to 7 other city-owned properties that the city is targeting for redevelopment. Within the packet, I included maps in there so you can see location of that property. The property is part of TID number 3. We did designate funds in that recent amendment for acquisition of property. So looking to go to closed session to get some direction from the committee on how we proceed on this. Happy to take any questions.
Finance, any questions before we would accept a closed session motion? Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, I guess that kind of piggybacks on what Alder Killian mentions with our ROI, and given the uncertainty that we've just illuminated here, I'd recommend that we have, and we're looking at CIP for the purchase of $850,000 for fire department property. And we should be able to similarly prioritize these projects. If we can get an ROI of 10 years, I'm all in for them. If we're looking at 30 years, that's a difficult task to ask the citizens to do right now. So I think we need to put priorities out there that align with our strategic plan, and hopefully that'll give us guidance and metrics to make better decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to note that CIP has not yet finished its work, but at least at the first pass, that land acquisition project was not scoring high enough to be funded for the next year. So we do have another meeting coming up where we're going to look a little more closely at the numbers we expect, but it's possible that we will not have funding for that out of the CIP budget for next year. Anyone else from finance? Okay.
Anyone from ED have questions about these two items, number 2 and 3, before closed session? All right. I guess, what, could I have somebody from Economic Development read the motion for closed session?
Sure, I can.
Alder Hanky, okay.
I move we go into closed session pursuant to 19.85 sub 1 sub E of the Wisconsin statutes for deliberating or negotiating the purchase of public properties, the vesting of public funds, or conducting other specified public business wherever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session relating to the approval or purchasing property at 901 and 1021 Cherry Street, and approval of purchasing property at 1514 North 2nd Street.
All right, is there a second to that motion? Alder Lukens. So this requires a roll call vote, so Alder Hanky,
Aye.
Alder Rasmussen,
Aye.
Alder Lukens,
Aye.
Alder Killian,
Aye.
and myself, aye.
I'll accept the same motion from finance. If someone wishes to put it forth, you wouldn't have to read it again.
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Martins, is there a second? Second by Dinny. We'll do a roll call vote as well. Dinny?
Aye.
Martins?
Aye.
Lukens?
Aye.
Watson?
Aye.
I'll vote aye as well. Both committees will adjourn to the Maple Room for closed session and then return to take open session if any is necessary. Thank you.